Hey, everybody. Well, welcome. I just did an awesome webinar with Frank from Viral Marketing, where we dug deep into some profit and loss statements. However, we didn't go as deep as I wanted to. And so I am shooting another one where I'm going to share with you, and I don't know if you can see this, I have pages of notes and P&L examples of real estate teams. These are actual P&Ls from actual real estate teams, some good, some not so good. And I'm going to go through some things with you that I think will be helpful, like some of the things I'm seeing that are keeping real estate team leaders stuck in production, that are keeping them from growing, right? That are keeping them profitable. And so I'm going to share my insights on where those problems are for most teams, because they're oftentimes just blind spots that they have. And then I'm going to show you those real P&L examples and break them down for you on kind of what's working and what's not working for those teams. And I'm going to keep it all confidential. So you're not going to see whose P&Ls they are, but you're going to be able to see the numbers. So let's jump in. I'm going to share my screen with you. Should see that in a second. Okay, you should see my notes page there. And so the first thing we got to do is all get clear and on the same page with the numbers or the language that we're talking. Bookkeeping and financials is the language of business. And so we all got to be talking the same language. And so let's just start with that. Really, there are 5 sections of a P&L. So the 5 sections. And so I want to make sure we're all on the same page with what we're going to be looking at here. The first one is the total revenue. That's pre-broker, pre-agent splits, basically the true top line revenue from any transaction that you or your team did, right? Before broker got paid, before anybody got paid. The second is going to be your cost of sale, also referred to as cost of goods sold, but it's the amount then that went out to the agents and the broker. Number 3 then is what you have left in gross profit. Okay, that's the amount that typically hits your bank account as the business owner. So after we paid the agents and broker, what did we actually have to work with in cash? 4 then is what we spent on operating expenses. Okay. So how much went out the door to pay the bills? And then 5 is going to be what we have left then in net profit. Okay. So I want to make sure we're clear on that, because here's what happens is I see a lot of real estate teams and really just business owners only focus on those 3. Why? Because typically speaking, a non-real estate specific accountant is only going to track those 3 for you. They're not going to help you understand the first 2, because this has everything to do with just taxes, right? You really don't need the first 2 to understand your taxable liability. All you need is how much at your bank account, how much did you spend, and what did you have left? So that's all they're worried about. But if we're really going to understand the health of the business and look at it like a CFO, like an entrepreneur, we've got to understand these 2, because this number, the gross profit, the percentage we have in gross margin, is key to profitability. If that number is too low, then we're never going to hit our net profit and you will be stuck in production. So those are the 5 sections of the P&L that we're going to look at it. I want you to think of it visually this way, like a pie. Okay. The pie is number 1, total revenue. That's the pie. So maybe it's $1 million. Maybe it's 10 million, doesn't matter. But the pie is the total money that the business generated in revenue. Then we have number 2, the cost of sale. That's going to be then the amount that got paid out to the agents, the broker, maybe third-party referral sources like Zillow or others that you might be spending money on. That's all your cost of sale. And so what's left then, by the way, that was number 2, cost of sale. What's left then is your gross profit. That's this section over here. It's basically whatever didn't get eaten up in cost of sale is what's left in gross profit. So that's number 3. Then we had to pay the bills, right? Our operating expenses, number 4. So that's going to be in here as well. operating expenses. That's number 4. And then, of course, we're left with whatever's left. Number 5 is our net profit. And so if you can see every real estate team, if we look at it like a pie, the business in a visual way, like a pie, it's cut into 3 pieces. That's it. And obviously, one of the most important ones is our net profit. If that's not big enough, if that piece of pie is too small, then either our operating expenses is too high or our cost of sale is too high. It's one or the other or both. If those pieces keep getting bigger and bigger, it just squeezes out our net profit. And so we have to figure out which one it is or both. And so that's what we're going to do through your bookkeeping. But that's the 5 sections and then how we're going to look at that visually. There's a couple of things I want you to keep in mind when you're thinking about net profit, because you will talk to one team leader and then you'll talk to a different team leader, and they could both have the exact same profit margin. Maybe both people have a 25% profit margin, but one is healthy and one is not. And it all comes down to a couple things. How much did the owner do in personal production? And how much do they pay themselves in salary? Okay. Because if you think about it, whenever an owner does a deal, they typically are paying themselves 0 in split. All that money goes into the business, into the bottom line. Where, if an agent does a deal, there's a cost of sale attached to it. So the more deals that the owner is doing, the higher that net profit needs to be. And there's a formula I have to use and we're not going to get into it now, but to help you determine what your net profit should be, but it's based on the amount of personal production you're doing as the team leader. If you're doing 70% of the production, you better have a really high net profit. If you're doing 5% of the production, the total production, you can have a much lower net profit and still be healthy, right? The whole goal with building a real estate team is to build a business that doesn't rely on your production in order to be profitable. You might choose to produce forever, and that's fine, but it doesn't rely on your production. There's so many teams where if the agent stepped out of production, if the team leader stepped out of production, they'd be losing money, right? There would be a loss, and therefore they have to produce in order to sell. And it's a losing game. And the more they scale, typically the worse it gets. And the more stress and anxiety and pressure it gets. So I'm going to help you see today on this call some of the things that team leaders are doing that's making that worse for themselves and how you can avoid it. Okay? So let's pull up some actual financials. So the first thing I want to talk about is how your splits affect your gross profit and then therefore your bottom line profit. As I mentioned before, the splits create your cost of sale. The higher the split to the agent, the higher the cost of sale. And so what should it be? How do we determine that? Is all things I want to dig into. But I want to show you some things that people, they set up their model incorrectly, and you can see it in the P&L, and I want to share that with you. There's a lot of confusion around this because most bookkeepers, accountants, CPAs are not tracking this stuff in their books, and they should be if they understood how important it is to your profitability and for the business not to rely on you to produce. Okay. Your cost of sale is going to be typically your largest expense, but it's also your greatest opportunity to get yourself out of production if you want to, or at least have a business that doesn't require you to produce. So we just have to make sure that the split model you have is in line with your overall profit goal. There are some teams where they have a very small profit margin goal because they're going to build this huge business. And that's fine, but then the split model has to be correct. Some others want a more small, tight-knit team where the profit margin is much higher. Well, then our split model has to be correct for that one as well. So let's jump into this example here. So as you can see in the first section there, this is section 1, income, okay? Total income. The total income there is 278, almost 279. Then we have our cost of sale. Okay, that's the amount that went out. Some went out in broker fees, and then some went out in agent commission splits, as well as some referrals there. But the total cost of sale is $120,316.91. It's 43.17%. That then left them with a gross profit of 158, or about 57% of the pie. And then we had to pay the bills. They're spending about 30% on their operating expenses. And then they're left with about 27% in net profit and owner pay. So here's what that looked like. 278 total revenue, 120 that went out in cost of sale. That's 43%. Then we were left with gross profit there of the difference of 57%. Okay, so right off the bat, we can see kind of how that's broken down. 43%, something like that, maybe. 43% went out in cost of sale. So that means all of the rest of this was the 57% in gross profit. Then we had to pay the bills. And so our operating expenses was 30%. Okay. And if we look at that, that's probably something like right in there, 30% operating expenses. And then we had 27% left in net profit. And so that is how this P&L broke down. And so at first glance, you may look at this and say, that looks pretty good. 27% net profit. I could see that being pretty good. Maybe $74,000 isn't a lot, but the margin, the 27% is good. 43% cost of sale isn't too bad, right? But the thing we're not considering here, though, is how much the owner is doing in personal production. Okay. So we did $278,000 in total revenue. If we scroll back to the top, we can see that the owner did $129,000 of it, or 46%. And the team did $142,000. So here's where the issue comes. And this is why it's so important to break our cost of sale out this way in the P&L. We can quickly realize that 43% cost of sale is not accurate, because that includes a bunch of production from the owner at a zero cost of sale. So when we actually blend the owner and the team production together, it says 43%, but that's not accurate. So let's look at what it actually is. If we look at this, let me show you the income. Let's just look at the buy side first. The buy side income was $69,000. The buy side cost of goods sold was $43,000. So if we take $43,000 and divide that by the $69,000, that's going to give us our buyer costs of goods sold. In this case, it was 77%. So every buyer deal that's done by a team member costs the company 77%. In other words, 77% goes to the agent, and the balance of 23% comes to the team. So we have 23% to work with to pay the bills and still have profit on a buyer deal. That's an issue. Okay. Then on the listing side, cost of goods sold, if we do the same calculation, $52,000 got paid out, and from the team listing income, no, I take that back. That was lease. So $11,000 got paid out, $22,000 on the listing side was brought in. So our listing side costs of goods sold is 49%. It's better, but it's still not great. That should be more like the buyer side cost of goods sold. And then we have some lease as well. So the lease COGS in this case was 82% whenever a lease deal is done. So on average, it averages out to 77%. We are averaging 77 cents on every dollar that goes to the agent whenever a team agent does a deal. So now you can see that if the owner of the team stepped out of production tomorrow, they would have 23% left after paying the agents on all these deals to be able to pay the bills and still have profit. And the problem then is that they're spending 30. So they would be losing 3% if they were able to step out of production. In other words, their production is keeping the business floating. And that is a bad economic model. And as they scale, it typically does not get better. Okay. It just becomes a higher dollar amount, but the same issue. So, I mean, you can see it. They brought in $129,000 and they only made $74,000. So they took the rest of that money that they made and they basically donated it to the team in a certain way and, helped them produce more deals, which made them no money. So that's an issue. That is the issue right there. I have another example around this for you around split models. I'm just going to scroll down and show you the actual numbers right down here. So in this economic model, there was $725,000 of total revenue. So that's the pie, 725. Then 438 of that went out in costs of sale, and that's 60%. Now, on this deal, on this P&L, the difference here is that this owner is doing very little production, like 5% of the total production. So we have a 60% cost of goods sold. So that means something like that, 60% cost of sale is going out. That means we have 40% left, this section here, in gross profit. Then we got to see what we spent. Well, after we take the owner's salary out of there, he's spending about 28% in operating expenses, 28% OpEx. And he's left with, after we add his salary back in there, what he paid himself, about $86,000 in net profit and any owner pay together, which is just the difference of 12% net profit and owner pay. So the question is there an issue here? And I guess it depends if you ask this person, if there's an issue. I think there is. If you're running a 12% margin, it's just not a lot of money, right? Even if you're happy with 12% on 725,000, it's just not a lot of money. It's $86,000. This person could go sell real estate with their eyes closed and make that kind of money, right? And so that's the issue. So where do we got to fix it? Well, the question is it, as always, is it operating expenses or cost of goods sold? I mean, to me, it's obvious that it's cost of goods sold. 60% of the dollars are going out the door before we ever even see any of it. If we're going to spend about 30% to run the business, which I think you need to, there's just not much left. And so we got to figure out where in the cost of sale is the issue. Okay. Because I think he's probably 10% too high. I think he should be more like 50% cost of sale, and that would bring his net profit up to 22%. Now it's exciting. For every $1 million our team does, I can do 220,000 of net profit, and I don't have to sell a single home. That's worth building. But how do we find that 10%? Well, we're going to go into our cost of sale, and we're going to do the same thing we did before. I'm going to look at the cost of sale margins. And I'll tell you, I already did it. And here's where the issue is. It's on the listing side of the business. $94,000 went out in cost of sale to the listing agents. $150,000 is what was brought in. So when we look at that, the listing cost of sale is 63%. When I do the same calculation on the buy side, it's only 48%. So we have a listing split issue. We are paying out too much on the listing deals. We need to add more value, take more of the risk as the team leader by hiring staff and doing marketing for the listings, and then paying the agent less. We're paying them too much and giving them too much of the risk. And there's just not profit in that. I will say the other issue with this person's P&L is that we're paying out a lot to third-party referrals, about another 7% there. But I think we need to find a way to get those listing side splits done differently. So now that kind of shows you what the issues are with, having the right splits. I want to show you one that I think does it right. Right here. Here's a scalable split model. So this person does it right, in my opinion. So total revenue, right there, about $3.5 million. This is January through September of this year, about $3.5 million. Some from, in this case, all from the team. So 0 owner transactions on $3.5 million. Okay. So it's a high producing team. When we look at the margins here, they've got about a 57% cost of goods sold and 43% left in gross profit. Then we got to pay the bills from that. And what that left us with, after we paid 28% out in operating expenses right there, we were left with about 14%. Okay. So not a huge percentage necessarily, but we're in the right ballpark. If we look at the margins here, our cost of sale was 57%, 2 million of 3.5 million. So that left us with the balance of 43% in gross profit. And then we spent 28% in operating expenses, and that left us with 15% in net profit. So if we look at that visually, again, somewhere in here, 57% cost of sale. We have 43% in gross profit. We took that and we took about 28% and we spent it on operating expenses, and we were left with 15% net profit. Now, it's only 15%. I'm not jumping up and down about that. I'd like to see them closer to 20 to 25%. But remember, the team leader is 100% out of production. They really are running a pretty healthy model. Now, I'll tell you, especially when we look at the cost of goods sold. I did those same calculations where I looked at their listing side cost of goods sold. And on that side of the business, it's 33%. So whenever they do a listing deal, the agent gets 33% and they keep the balance of 67%. So notice the difference. Remember in the other models we did, it was like opposite. It was like 63% going to the agent, 30-some staying with the team. This is exactly the opposite on a much higher total revenue as well. And our buyer cost of goods sold is 40%. So the splits are not an issue. They have good splits with the agents in order for them to make profit. So then the question is, well, this is a good model, but I still think they're a little high on COGS. But if it's not the splits, what is it? Let's go back up to the cost of goods sold. If it's not the splits, what else is it? Where else are there any deals going or money going out in cost of goods sold? Here's the big one right here. Referrals paid. They are paying a lot out in third-party referrals at closing, which is costing them dearly in their cost of sale, right? If they didn't have that, if they got better at marketing and really focused on generating their own business, it's not easy to do, but you can do it over time. They would see their cost of goods sold go down dramatically and their net profit go up. They might have some more expenses because they're going to be spending more on operating expenses, but it shouldn't be much. And they should be able to see that net profit go up, 5 to 10%, 5 to 10%. And now they're at 20, 25%. And if they can get away from those third-party leads, I'd rather even see them come down in total revenue, do fewer deals as a team, but have more money, dollars in net profit. So I think that's a good one to, consider there. The next kind of issue I want to talk about is those third-party kind of lead sources that so many people are dependent on. Okay. I think more and more I'm seeing people grow their real estate teams and grow them fast, but at a huge cost. And let me just show you what that looks like. So here's our total income, 1.3. This is January through September of this year on this team, 1.3 million. This is zero owner production. So this is the team that runs without the owner selling. So that's our income. Then we have our cost of sale, 67%. It's high. And we're only left with 32% left in gross profit. Then we got to pay the bills. We're at 27. And so the balance is about 5%. That's an issue. Okay. So when we look at those numbers, here's what they look like. Our cost of sale is running us 68%. Which leaves us with 32% in gross profit. That's this to this. This little section here is 32% because we spent 68 on our cost of sale. So of that 32%, then we had to pay the bills. And we spent, on paper, it says 27. We actually spent about 23% on operating expenses. because we paid ourselves a salary. It says on paper he spent $352,000, but really he only spent 302, or actually 295 because of a salary. And we really had 120 in net profit if we add that salary back in. So we didn't spend 352, we spent 295, which is 23%. And then 120,000 in net, which is 9%. But when we add that back in, that salary, the profit and salary is 9% of the pie. 23% operating expenses, 68% cost of sale. It's obvious our cost of sale is the issue. Okay. But why? Is it splits with the agents or is it something else? Well, let's go back up. We have an opportunity to get our cost of sale down. And the more we can get it down, the more this net profit just increases. Could we get it to 50%? All of a sudden, we'd be at a really healthy net profit margin. So let's see what the issue is. Let's go up to cost of sale. Well, the first section of cost of sales are broker fees. Is it broker? No, broker is only 3% of our cost of goods sold. And I see it usually between 5 and 8%. So we're actually low on broker cost of sale. Is it our buyer agent cost of sale? Well, let's look at that. We take 395,000 and we divide it by what the buyer agents brought in, 870,000. We have a 45% buyer cost of sale. Great. We're under 50%. So that's not the issue. Let's look at the listing cost of sale. The listing agents brought in 132,000. If we divide that by what they brought, we paid them 132. They brought in 336. That's 39%. Well, we know it's not the splits then. So it's not the broker and it's not the splits to the agents. What else could it be? Right here in purple, referrals paid, boom. Total 303,000. So 24% is going out in third-party referrals. There's our profit. There is our profit. So the reason we're making almost no profit is because, you just get rid of all these, 23% of our cost of goods sold is third-party referrals. If we could get away from those and we could just turn that into profit, all of a sudden our profit without any owner production would go up to 32%. Right? Even if we increased our operating expenses by 7%, we'd be at 25% net profit. That's fun. Zero owner production, 20 to 25% net profit. It's doable. But the issue with this team is they're relying heavily on third-party referrals. And that's really tough if that's a good chunk of your revenue. Okay. Here's another quick example. I'll just scroll to the bottom and show you the margins. So this is a $3 million team. Okay. They have a cost of sale of 2.1, which is 71%. 71% of the pie is going out in cost of goods sold. That left us with a gross profit then of 29%, which is just this section here. Okay. And then we had to pay the bills. On paper, it says 868,000. We actually only spent 780, again, after we removed the owner's salary, which is 26%. So 26% operating expenses. And that left us with just a tiny little bit, not 61, but 94,000 when we add the salary in there, which is 3%. So that's this little section right here. 3% net profit on $3 million in total revenue. It's a problem. Is it operating expenses? No, we're under 30%. It's cost of sale. Let's figure out where. Same idea here. I'm going to go right into it and just show you it's not listing splits. It's not buyer splits. What it is referrals paid right there. 23%. 23% referrals paid out. So they're relying heavily on Zillow and other third-party lead sources. So if they got rid of those, our problem would be solved because we'd have plus 23% profit and we'd be at 26% net profit if we could just get rid of that huge chunk of Zillow referral fees in our cost of goods sold. Now we're running a healthy model. So they might have a good top line, but the net profit's just not there. And that's an issue. So This one is a good example. This is a profitable model that doesn't rely on third-party lead sources. Let's look at it. Let's scroll to the bottom again. I'll just show you the high-level numbers. So they did $2 million in total revenue. They had $937,000 in cost of sales. So that's 47%. They were left then with 53% in gross profit. Okay. So right off the bat, 47% in cost of sale, which left all of this all the way to here, which is 53% in gross profit they had to work with. Then they had to pay the bills. On paper, it says $895,000, but when we add, the owner had a good amount of salary in there. So $668,000 is really what they spent, which is 33%. So 33% operating expenses. And that left us with a net, not of 180, but we have to add the salary back in there as well. And when we do, they really made $407,000 in net profit and owner pay, which is 20%. Net profit and owner pay. So there you go. $2 million team, 20% net profit. How did they get there? Well, they kept their cost of goods sold under 50%, and then their operating expenses as close to 30 as they could. If they could squeeze their operating expenses a little bit more, maybe they could leverage their staff people with VAs and keep the cost down. There's other ways they could do it, get better at converting the leads they are spending money on, whatever it is. But their net profit was 20%. So this is the model you want to build if you want to be able to exit production. By the way, this team leader is 100% out and still be, highly effective in your net profit. There's another example I want to show you here of a team. This is a 2022 versus 2023 comparison. And I want you to see the issue with how they built this business. So 2022, they built an awesome business that generated $8.5 million in revenue, and 2 million of that, or 23%, was net profit. Okay. So here's the pie chart. Here's what it looked like. 8.5 million, 50% went in cost of goods sold. They spent under 30 and they were left with 23.5% net profit and owner pay. Healthy model. Super awesome. And that's on $8.5 million of top line revenue. Okay. That was 2022. Then watch what happened. They said, you know what? We should grow. And grow they did. They grew by 1.8 million in total revenue, from 8.5 to 10.4. Okay. But watch what happened to the net profit. It went from 2 million, or 23.5%, down to 1.2, or 12.4. So think about this. Increased 1.8 million in revenue, top line. Wow. Looks awesome. They're growing fast. Lost 737,000 from the previous year. They had 2 million in net profit. They went down to 1.282. What the heck happened? How do we grow 1.8 million in profit and make less money? Well, let's figure it out. When we look at the pies, what did we see over here? 50% cost of goods sold, 23% net profit, 26 operating expenses. Well, if it's 20, remember, like I said before, if your net profit goes down or it's not where you want it to be, you have to look either in the orange section, operating expenses, or in the red section, cost of goods sold. Well, it's obvious which one it is when we look over here. The cost of goods sold went up. The operating expenses did not, as a percentage of the revenue. They actually went down by 0.4. They went from 26 operating expenses down to 25.6. But the cost of goods sold went from 50 to 62. That's 12% that the cost of goods sold went up. Why? Let's look at the cost of goods sold breakdown. Here's 2022. It wasn't the broker issue. That's only at 1% of their revenue. Their cost of sale to the agents was only 45.5. Where was it? Well, they only had $61,000 in 2022 going out in referral. 61,000 on 8.5 million. But when we go over to 2023, look what happened. We went up to 1.8 million in referrals paid. There's the difference in cost of goods sold. That's how we could go from 50% cost of goods sold over here to 62. And that's the 12% difference that we saw in the net profit. It all, for the most part, a few other little things, but it all mostly went in the fact that we shifted from doing our own deals to adding in these third-party lead sources, and we actually lost money on growth. So it's the perfect example of why you can't just focus on growth. Growth for growth's sake is not good in most cases. And in this case, they actually lost money by growing. Okay. So keep that in mind. I do want to talk a little bit about brokerage costs, because I think there are still some people who struggle with the cost of their broker. And I want you to know what that can look like for some teams. And so here's an example of a team that has some pretty high broker costs. Now, I'm not picking on any specific brokers, and I'm not saying that a high cost broker isn't valuable, but I think we have to remember there has to be a cost benefit analysis. Does my broker bring value as much or more as it's costing me? In other words, if I paid somebody else less, could I go get the same value on my own versus paying the broker for less money? And so those are the questions we got to ask. I'm typically seeing most teams in that $1 to $5 million, $1 to $3 million range, around 5 to 8% of their revenue is going to the broker. Okay. Once you get over that, over 3 million, it actually goes down. And we're seeing it 1 to 2% on people that are $3 to $10 million of revenue, right? As you go up, it gets less and less and less. Usually because you're capping for the most part, and those types of things. Now, there are some brokers who offer a ton of value and cost a lot more. And the question here is, we just have to ask ourselves if the value is there. And so here's an example. Total income, 2.5 million from January through September of this year. The owner did 1.7, the team did 2.5 for, or I'm sorry, the team did 831 for a total of 2.5. Okay, so the owner's doing the majority of the production, 67%. Then we look at our cost of goods sold. If we scroll down, cost of goods sold was 1.3 or 55%. Can already see there's going to be an issue, because if they're doing 1.7 million and their cost of sales 1.3, the owner did 1.7, the team only did 2.5. We have an issue. 45% less left in gross profit. Then we had to pay the bills. We spent 23%. That looks good at 583. And we were left with 551 or 22%. Well, is that good or not? Some people would love to have a 22% net profit. The problem is $551,000 is the dollar amount, and the owner did 1.7 million of their own personal production. So we have a problem here. Let's look at it. Here's the details. 2.5 million in total revenue. Our cost of sale was 1.4 million or 55%. That left us with 45% gross profit. So 55% cost of sale, 45, whoops, sorry, that's not where it's supposed to go. 45% gross profit is this section here. So we had left to pay the bills and still have profit. So then we spent in operating expenses 23%, which would be here. And we were left with a net profit of 22%. So is that good or bad? Remember, I told you at the beginning of the call, we got to know how much the owner did. The owner did 1.7 million in their own production. Okay. So that is 67%. So we made 22, but yet the owner generated 67%. If we put the owner's production on here, kind of to display how much it was something like that, this much of the pie the owner did in their own production. So that's an issue, because this is all they kept. That piece of the pie is all they kept. The rest just went out to pay the agents and broker and to pay the bills. So where's the issue? It's obvious the issue is our cost of sale is way too high. We just got to figure out where and why. Okay. So let's go look up here in the cost of sales section. the agent splits are not the issue, believe it or not. It's only 47% cost of sale on the agent split. So when an agent does a deal on this team, about 47% goes to the agents. Third-party referrals are not the issue because we only have 0.79% of the revenue going out in agent referrals, like third-party referrals. So that's not an issue. What else could it be? Well, it's right here in the purple line. 26%, $650,000 went out to pay the broker, right? It's an issue, huge issue. Unless they're bringing tons of value, that's a huge, huge issue. Now, to be fair to this broker, they did get $150,000 of reimbursements from the broker at the end of the year, but it's still then, if we take 650 minus 150 that the agent got reimbursed at the end of the year, it's still $500,000 is what it cost the broker, or 20%. That's a ton going to the broker. Now, again, am I saying that it's not a good broker, that they shouldn't pay that amount? I'm just saying if we see that our broker costs are that high, we have to ask those questions and really do a cost benefit analysis and be honest with ourselves around whether or not we can get the same or better value somewhere else. People don't do business with you because of the brokerage you're at, period. I know sometimes people think that, but it's not the case. So let's look at a healthy one here around the broker cost, just so you can see how it affects the net profit. Here's one with low broker costs. I'm just going to scroll down to the high level numbers so you can see. We have our cost of sale. Well, we did 1.8 million in total revenue. Okay, 1.8 million in total revenue. The owner did almost no deals. So we have a 50% cost of sale. Then we're left with 50% in gross profit. So that's the other half of the pie over here. Then we had to pay the bills. And so the bills were 38% operating expenses. And we're left with a net of 12%. That's how it broke out. Okay, so there was a little bit of salary on top of that that's included in the operating expenses as well for the owner. So he probably really didn't spend 38%, and he probably had a little more than a 12% net if we add that back in. But just on the hard numbers here, that's what it looked like. So I think he's overspending a little bit on operating expenses. I'd like to see him get that down to 30, and then that other 8% goes right into net. And he'd now be at a 20% net. So that's how I would work with this person to figure out how do we fix the problem. And we determine, is it I'm overspending on people, lead gen marketing, or overhead? Which one is it? And we'd have to make some changes. But as far as the cost of goods sold goes, he's looking good at 50%. And here's your broker costs. He's at 1.3% broker costs. So very low broker costs, and you can still build a business that generates almost 2 million, and he will be over 2 million because, or no, this is for the full year. So almost 1.75 million. Okay. With him doing no production. So very, very good model around broker costs. Now keep in mind, again, I'm seeing typically between 5 and 8% broker costs. So the next thing I want to talk to you about now, kind of the next thing I want to shift into, is show you some examples of team leaders that are low on profitability because they aren't working their database. They are not working their database. They're relying too much on either third-party leads or just costly paid leads, okay? So let's just show you how that approach, if we don't work our database, how it can affect your profit margin. So here's a team, 1.75 million in total revenue, 1.8 we'll call it. Cost of goods sold, I made some adjustments here because there was a line item in here for a business loan that really doesn't affect the numbers for our purposes. So really his total cost of goods sold was $518,000, or about 29%. Gross profit, 1.2 or 71. Then we had our operating expenses of 850 or 48%. And we were left with 390 or 22%. So here's how that broke out. Again, 1.8 million in total revenue. That was the pie. We took 518,000 or 29%, and we paid that out in cost of goods sold. We were left with 71% in gross profit. So cost of sale there, and we were left with the majority of the pie left in gross profit. But then we had to pay the bills, 48% on operating expenses. Yikes. And unfortunately, that left us with only 22% net profit. So 22%. Now, first thing I'd ask is, well, how much production did the owner do? How much production did the owner do? But I can tell right off the bat, his cost of sales it's already really pretty low. I don't think that's going to be the issue here. The issue is going to be that our operating expenses are almost 50% of the equation. Okay. So he didn't do that. Yeah, he did do that much. He's doing 58% of the production. So that's why the cost of sale is as low as it is at only 29%, because he's doing the majority of the production. But what's obvious, as I mentioned, is our operating expenses are too high at 48%. If we want to increase our net, the first thing I'd be digging into is the operating expenses. Well, let's look at them. There are really three categories of operating expenses. We have lead gen and marketing. We have people. And we have, and I'm sorry, I said lead gen marketing first, but that was overhead, people, and lead gen marketing. So let's write down what they spent on those. Lead gen marketing, he's at 17% of the revenue. People is at 16%. It shows 19% on paper, but 3% of that was to him, the owner, in salary. And then 12% on overhead. So where's the biggest issue? Right here, lead gen marketing. I think he's 7% too high on lead gen marketing. So can we figure out where it is? Well, I already did. It's right here under lead gen marketing. Right here, radio and television, 153,000, or about 8%. If I were them, I'd be looking very closely at the return on investment on that spend. It could be there, but to me, it's not. If they're having to spend 17%, you should be able to spend around 10% lead gen marketing, or 10 cents on every dollar that you generate to be able to run your real estate team. And you do that by doing, past client and client appreciation events, database marketing, those types of things. And you can see there's some money spent on client appreciation, but it's nothing compared to that. And they're not spending a ton on internet lead gen. So it's not going other places or print marketing. It's almost all going to radio and television. And so we need to really look at how that's converting into sales, especially if radio and television is mostly to generate listing opportunities. The majority of their deals are still on the buy side of the business when I look at that. So we got to be careful of that. Okay. Another example of us not working our database is here. Here's another team, 592,000 of total revenue, 183 in cost of goods sold, or about 30%. Okay. Then we have our gross profit of 70%. Then we spent 57% and we're left with 12%. So here's what it looked like. 31% in cost of sale, 31% cost of sale. We were left then with the remaining 69% in gross profit. Then we spent 58%, huge chunk, on operating expenses, and we were left with 11 to 12% net. Okay. So I don't love this for this agent and this team leader. There was some owner commission as well. Not a ton, but about 10% of the revenue came from the owner. 90% came from non-owner deals. So that's great. So he's mostly out of production, he or she, but we're only at 11% net. Well, where's the issue? It's not cost of sale. It's right here. Operating expenses, 58%. So we need to figure out, is it lead gen marketing? Is it people? Or is it overhead? Those are the three categories of all of your expenses. And so for this person, they were at only 5% people expenses. They were really high on overhead. I'm not going to lie. That's their biggest issue. Overhead's just all the other junk that we got to buy. And some of it's good, but office space, technology pieces, just office supplies, consumables, coaching, travel, those types of things is the overhead stuff. But lead gen, we were at 16%. So he's too high, about 6% on lead gen and marketing. He's way too high on overhead. So we do need to fix that. But if we specifically are talking about lead gen and marketing, if we go up to that, you spent $98,000 or 16% on lead gen marketing. That's this category right here. Those are all the lead gen marketing dollars. And so let's look at the big one right off the bat. Internet lead gen, 42,000 or about 7%. It's a huge chunk. So my guess is he's probably spending money on leads, paid leads, not working the database, paid leads. Look at this. Here's the client appreciation category. $1,500, 0.25 versus 7.14. So they're spending a ton of their budget on internet lead gen. My guess is there probably isn't a lot of great conversion going on. Could be because of an accountability issue. It could be because they don't have a good lead protocol system with their agents. Could be training. Their agents aren't good at converting. Could be a number of things. But we can't spend that much on lead gen marketing, especially if we're not doing our database marketing. That is the highest ROI. We recommend viral marketing in a big way for the very first step on database marketing. Okay. Where you viral marketing, you can check them out, getviral.com, where you are, they're doing a great job. They explain it on their website, what they do. But that's a great issue in this business, is that internet lead gen cost. Okay. So let's look at one that does it well. They work their database well, and I want you to see how it affects profitability. The last two ones we looked at that spent a lot of money on marketing had very low profit numbers compared to the owner production, where I want you to see this one here. So I'm just going to scroll to the bottom and show you what this one looks like. Our cost of sale. So we did $815,000 in total revenue. Our cost of sale was 44%. The owner does very little production. 44% cost of sale. Okay, that's good. Okay. Then we had 56% left in gross profit. We spent 37%. And again, it wasn't on paper, it was 334. It was actually 303 because they gave themselves some salary. So they really spent 37% on operating expenses. And they were left with a net of 155,000, 124 on paper, but 155 when we add their salary back in, which was 19%. So that's how their pie was broken out, with the owner doing very little production. So they're almost at 20% net. They spent 37 in operating expenses, 44 in cost of goods sold. I actually think their operating expenses are a little bit high. But let's look at their category of lead gen marketing to see how much they spent. Starts right here and it goes right there. They spent 81,000 or just under 10%. There you go. Healthy margin, right? Healthy margin. And they're not spending a ton of money on internet lead gen. Not that you can't, but you have to be good at converting it before we're just spending money on it. They're doing the majority of them with database marketing right here. 7% of it's going towards general advertised marketing, database type marketing, okay? 10%, and they're able to hit their net profit margin of 20% with very little owner production. So you can see how when we're doing the right kind of marketing, it boosts profitability almost right away. So there you go. Okay. The last thing I want to show you here is around the listing versus the buy side of the business. So many of us have the same splits on the listing side as we do the buy side, and it's killing your profitability. On the listing side of the business, you have the opportunity to make profit. Why? Because you can leverage the agents in the transaction far greater on the listing side than you can the buy side. Imagine someone else could be setting the listing appointment. Well, we could start all the way from generating. Somebody else, you, the team leader, could be doing marketing to generate listing opportunities. You could potentially hire even someone else to set those appointments for the agent. That's what we did on our team. We had inside sales agents setting those appointments. Then the agent could go on that appointment and convert that appointment into a signed listing agreement. Okay. Then you could have staff take that contract and process it and get that listing on the market and do everything until basically there's an offer on the table. And so they could be highly leveraged. That agent only had to be part of one piece of the transaction, which was to go to the appointment. Worst case, they have to take your leads and also convert them into the appointment. and they have to do 2 of the 4 steps. But the idea here is that's way more than we can typically leverage on the buy side of the business. So we typically pay more on the buy side than we do on the listing side to the agent, right? And so I want you to see how that affects profitability. Here's a team. It's a $7 million team. Okay. So I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom and show you we're just going to write out the numbers here. Okay. $7 million in revenue. They had $3.1 million in cost of sale, which left them with $3.9 million in gross profit. So that right there is 45% cost of goods sold on 7 million. So number one, if you think you can't build a big team, high producing team, and maintain under 50% cost of sale, here's proof that you can, right? But the question becomes, how do we do that? Okay, how do we do it? Well, let me show you. By the way, the net profit is close to 20%. Okay, they are spending 37% on operating expenses, which was just over 2 million. And then they were left with, let me just get that clear so we can see it. 2.6 million in operating expenses. And they were left with 1.2 to 1.3, 1.2 million in net profit. Okay, I'm rounding, so all the numbers don't always add up perfect here. But net profit, okay, which was 17, almost 18%. Okay. Yeah, 18%. So that's amazing on $7 million. And the owner does very little. The owner does 7% of the production while the team does 93% of the total production. Okay. So how did they get to 45% cost of goods sold? Imagine if that cost of goods sold was 60, 65, they would have nothing in profit. And I see that all the time. So what are they doing? Let's scroll up and look at their cost of sale. Listing cost of sale, 40%. There it is. They're able to maintain 40% listing cost of sale. Okay. How did we figure that out? Well, here we go. We just take the listing cost of sale, the amount paid out to the agents on the listing side of the business, $770. And then we look at the amount brought in from that team on the listing side, 1.9. So we take 769 divided by 1.9, and it's 40%. So when a team member does a listing deal, they're getting 40, the company's retaining 60. We need to do as many listings as we can in that scenario. But I'll tell you, this team leader is a high producing team leader in the sense that they have built a ton of leverage for their agents. So the agents don't have to do a lot for them to be able to, sell a listing. And so they can do way more listings in less time and less stress and make way more money, even if they had a higher split to the agent. So that's how they got to a 45% cost of sale. That is how we can build a profitable business with the right splits on the listing side of the business. So another example of that, I want to give you one more around this, is this team, January through October of this year, 2.2, almost 2.3 million in revenue. And then if I scroll down, I'll show you all the numbers. So they had 2.3 million in total revenue. They had 1 million in cost of sale, which was 46%. So another one with under 50% cost of sale, 1.3 million in gross profit. And again, 0 owner deals. This team doesn't have it's like tiny amount of owner deals. 7% versus the team doing 93%. Okay. So very, very low owner production. And so how did they get to a 46% gross cost of sale and a 54% gross profit? Well, here's how they did it. Their listing cost of goods sold, when I looked at it, they paid out $242,000 to the agents, but the agents brought in $812,000. So that's 30% on the listing side. Their buyer COGS, they paid out $667,000 in commission, and the team brought in $1.28 million in buyer deals. That's 52%. Blended is 46%. And so this is where profitability lives, right here. as many deals as they can do. They're making some profit on the buyer COGS, even after expenses. But on listing side, that's where the profit lives. But how do they do that? Well, again, highly leveraged listing agents. They have really good marketing to generate listing opportunities. And then their admin highly leverage the agents with support. They don't even do their own CMAs. They have somebody else doing the CMAs, somebody else prepping all the paperwork. The agent shows up, converts the deal into a listing. They hand that back to the listing coordinator, and they take it from there until there's an offer to negotiate. So we can pay 30%. Our agents can make a ton of money, but we don't have to be giving them the farm. So that's that example. So I hope that this was helpful for you to see some of the same things that you might be struggling with. Other team leaders are as well. I know I did as I grew my team and eventually sold it. But remember that you can fix it. There are teams that are doing it well. And I just showed you the examples of those. So if you need help with real estate specific bookkeeping, I want you to reach out to me. You can visit us at simple-numbers.com. On there, there's a button for a free strategy session around your financials. I'm happy to do that with you. You can request a quote for services. So if you're looking for help around your bookkeeping, I'm happy to do that. But I hope today was helpful. I know it was a long meeting, but I think there was some good value, hopefully, in looking at P&Ls of other teams. Because guess what? Nobody's doing this. When's the last time you were on a call where you got to look at directly at other real estate teams' P&Ls? It just doesn't happen. So I'm glad you're here. Thanks for watching. Take care.